Welcome to the DingeCast. We are driven by a passion for discovery and the belief that history should be uncovered. Our mission is to reveal the hidden realities of the past to bring history into the light. Welcome to the DingeCast.
Alrighty, we are back again with Joan Renner. As we said before, her work has been featured everywhere. She was featured in Los Angeles Magazine. She co-authored the LA Times bestseller LAPD 53 alongside James Ellroy. She's the author of The First with the Latest, which is a look at Aggie Underwood, the trailblazing crime reporter, and her
Mhm.
latest book of mobsters and movie stars, which you have to check out. She's also a regular appearance on TV. She's been in dozens of these true crime shows and documentaries. And she's also a historian at the LA County Sheriff's Department Museum. And if you need more than that, you can go to derangedlacrimes.com to check out all of her work. So thank you for coming back, Joan. We are so happy to have you here.
Oh, it's really it's a pleasure. I enjoyed myself so much, and I've been thinking, well, because I was thinking about I pulled a couple of cases that I really love kind of out of my archives. So maybe we could talk a little bit about a couple of them tonight, because there's a couple of them that just really I like the well, there's only, like I think we talked about it before, there's only a finite number of crimes that you can commit, that can be committed, you know? So what really drives my interest in anything is always the characters. What's different about them? How do they react in a situation? And so I pulled up a couple of stories in which there's some pretty interesting characters. And I thought, well, I could share a couple of those. But before I do that, this is because I know last time I was telling you about this guy that my brother and I knew, and he was in prison for decades for a murder, and it was he's since been paroled, but it's funny, like I wrote about it a number of years ago, and it happened around the same time as the Manson murders, so 1969-ish, 1970. And but it never no, everything has ripples. And literally today, I got an email from a woman, and I won't use her name, but the woman that he was one of the people he was part of murdering was the school teacher from South Orange County, and her name was Mrs. Brown. And I got an email today, and the woman said, "I used to babysit for Mrs. Brown.
Mhm.
I would watch her son after school. We lived just a few houses down from her. In fact, my dad used to carpool with her husband. They both worked in the same aerospace company. What I remember most about her was she was so cool for her time. She had the big 60s beehive hair, and she wore really cute modern for the time clothing. And it was really shocking, but we had read about the Manson murders and thought it was maybe the same cult. South Orange County was orange groves. I know this because I was living in South Orange County. I mean, I was living in Orange County, not South Orange County, but same difference at the time. And it was orange groves practically from where Garden Grove stopped, where I lived, all the way down to the beach. It was like, and if you drove out to Laguna Beach, it was all orange groves and strawberry fields and pepper fields and stuff. And she said it was, it was South Orange County was orange groves from Tustin to San Juan Capistrano, and it was. The 5 freeway was 2 lanes in each direction, which I remember vividly, and Ortega Highway, where they found Mrs. Brown's body, barely had any traffic. I mean, it was really kind of rural. And she said, I used to envision her car driving down a dark road and being carjacked. Used to think about it a lot. Don't even know how I came on this article, but it brought back memories I hadn't thought of in years. And and it's stuff like that. And I realize, anytime I write something, it could somebody can find it that that hasn't. And this woman had a direct connection. And I've heard from some of Mrs. Brown's students who were students of hers when she was murdered, and how it impacted them as kids. She was a grammar school teacher, and it's just like all these things just have ripples. It always makes me want to be the most responsible I can be when I'm telling any of the stories, the most respectful I can be. And it's just interesting because I get then another layer of the person I've written about that I didn't know. And it really brings it home. So I thought I'd share that because it was just so, because we just talked about it, you
Yeah.
know, and there in my email today was just out of the blue. And I thought, wow, because I haven't had any email on that case in a while. It's been a little while. And it
Yeah.
was just like, wow, you just never know.
It's weird to think
Amazing to
about. It's like
me.
we focus on the killer themselves most of the time. It's think of all the repercussions, all the lives affected by that. People don't forget, right? They sit with that for
Yeah.
decades, probably. It's
Well, yeah, I mean,
damage to
'cause
so many other
imagine
people.
she was in the house, babysit the son and they knew each other, they were neighbors and they knew each other and they had a connection. And then she's just gone in the most brutal way. So I just like, wow, I don't know. It's hard sometimes for me to think about the cases like that, I mean, just what the people did and just to know someone who actually committed a murder. It's
Yes. I mean, and you knew him for a while, but just the fact that you guys picked him up hitchhiking, like you said, in between, when
oh
that
my
happened and when he was arrested, it's like what a spooky encounter.
oh my
Oh my
God,
goodness.
I know. And when my brother's best friend and I were together and when we saw this in the newspaper and we went just, oh my God, no way. I mean, we knew that he was just, to be honest, he was just kind of a big dumb kid, and that's kind of how we always thought of him.
Yeah.
And but basically harmless, but no,
Yeah.
there was a lot of rage in there. And I heard later from people who lived close to him or neighbors of his, and they said the family was complete chaos. It's really no wonder that at least one of them ended up in prison. It's not a surprise because it was total chaos in the house. So I feel bad for him for that, but I grew up with a lot of people who had tough upbringings and they never killed anyone.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, a guy that was basically another brother to me, he was addicted to heroin off and on for quite a long time. He's the one I think I told you last time. He's the one who came home from school one day and his parents had moved away. Literally.
Oh my God.
Literally, his parents had moved away. His parents had never told the kids that they weren't married, which at this time would have been kind of a shock when they did that.
Yeah.
And they left the older sister and some of the other kids in charge. His two older brothers were already in prison for an armored car robbery.
Mhm.
So if anyone was going to end up in prison, it should have been him, but he didn't. He had substance abuse problems, and he finally his liver at like 39 years old, his liver was so bad. He was on a list, but they were never gonna bump him to the head of it, the list, because he was still an addict. He used to um, sell his methadone to buy heroin, and and it's just like but he didn't end up killing anyone. The only person he ever hurt really was himself and the people who loved him, and we were only hurt because we wanted his life to be better than it was, and he died in a motel in Anaheim over by Disneyland. It's been quite a while now. And I remember my brother was living out of state. And so I got tapped to do the eulogy. And like a couple weeks before he died, he told me that he and his dad had reconciled. His dad was a dick. He said, that we've reconciled. It's all good. And we reconciled before my dad died. And I said, oh, well, I'm really glad to hear that because, sometimes that's healing. And so, but he sounded scared, and I never heard him sound anything but badass. He never sounded scared. And then all of a sudden he was dead. My brother and I figured him for an 8 ball on purpose, you know. But but when I went to do the eulogy at the funeral home, I get there and his dad is there, and I thought, "Aren't you dead? You're supposed to be dead." And I thought,
Wow.
Matt, you shithead. You told me this story and I bought it, and here's your father. And so I said, "Oh, yeah, good to see you." And I, whew, you know, and then And so then, because I think his body was still at the coroner, because it was an unattended death in an overdose, and so his body's still at the coroner. So there's no casket, there's nothing there but just a floral thing. And I said to the assembly, I said, leave it to Matt to not even attend his own funeral. I mean, this is this is who he was. But
Yeah.
but so I never really like if anyone should have really turned out bad, he should have been the one and he didn't, So I don't know what it is in people. What do you think? I don't know what makes people why can you have that same kind of awful experience in one person? Like in the old movies where there's two brothers and one ends up a priest and the other one ends up a gangster,
Right.
Like one ends up a cop and the other one ends up a gangster. What is that?
Was it like fight or flight maybe? Like you can either, I forget what the term is, but you know, either you repeat your environment, like a rough upbringing certainly is a catalyst to make it easier to end up in that path, right? But for some people,
Yeah.
they'll resist it no matter what. I guess it's just your willpower, your ability to oversee the near term. I don't know. I wish
I
I
Yeah.
could understand.
For me, in my opinion,
Yeah,
sorry
what do you
to
think,
buff
Jennifer?
right
No, do it.
because that's funny you mentioned, Joan. My brother ended up in addiction. He for 10 years he
Yeah,
was
it's a long time.
alcoholic, he was doing drugs, and I went the opposite direction. I was like, school, school, school. I have to like do this, do that. I was very ambitious. I never let anything stop me. And that whole time I'm going through school and he's just like trashing his life. So,
Yeah.
and we had the same up, like my mom was a very helicopter mom. She was always on top of us. She loved us, like she like smothered us with love. She's still
Aw,
like we're very close, all three of us. So it's
that's
not
cool.
like, but my opinion is it goes back to, and I'm sorry to say this, but it's back to like a gender thing. I feel that men and women experience life very differently.
You do.
Um, and it also depends on like, how you identify, like if you're transgender, you're bisexual, whatever, all of these things inform your life and feed your
Yes.
life differently. I was very, I've always just been this person, not that I'm saying like, oh, everybody loves me, but
But they
usually
do.
people people accept me. They're like, oh, because I'm just me and I'm very, but with my brother, it was very different. He
Yeah.
was very introverted. I'm extroverted, and I feel like women get different treatment than men, in my opinion. And then that kind of, because he was introverted and not into sports, especially around this area, people tended to kind of pick on him, and that
Yeah.
made him a little hard, and that made him fall easily like into like these addiction issues,
Yeah.
versus I got a little bit picked on too, but it wasn't the same. It was for different reasons, and I was tough and I kept going. So I feel like even if you're in the same house and you get the same upbringing or whatever it is, like there's one sibling or one person that's going to go one way and going to handle it another, and the other
Hmm.
that isn't. And even if it's like male to male, like two brothers, let's say,
Yeah.
it's still, I feel like it just depends on, even if you're in the same household, it's going to be very different experience
Yeah.
depending on your personality and who you are,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
how it's innate. I feel like you're born a certain way, and then sadly that's how you receive the world, and the world receives you.
That's
So
Yeah.
part of what I was going to say, right? Some people are just hardwired
Right.
that way
Yeah.
that, children already have such a big personality for who they're going to be later in life. So you're kind of destined for something there. But it's interesting what you're saying. It's like the idle hands aspects, right? That if you
Yeah.
fill your life with sports and all this other stuff, you'll be too distracted to be bad. But leave somebody to their own devices at the wrong time, they might
yeah,
choose the wrong path. I don't know. So
Yeah.
Joan, it's interesting because in the last few articles on your blog do cover um, just I think it's like the 1950s era, and it's a lot
Yeah.
of crime driven by drugs, that whether they're an addict just trying to get money or something. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of people associate that scene maybe coming later, like the 70s, definitely the 80s,
Right.
80s. But so the dope scene in Los Angeles goes much further back than maybe people
Oh yeah. And
thought.
well, I mean, once because when because when during World War II, a lot of the dads were gone. They were in the service or they were doing war work or whatever. The moms were as well. That's when they started seeing more of these latchkey kids, kids who'd come home from school, and they'd be on their own for a few hours. And that's when they started to identify problems with teenagers for the first time. And in the post-war period, there was a lot, like in the late 40s and into the early 50s and beyond and into the 50s, there was a lot of drug addiction. And in big cities and in Los Angeles in particular, they had a huge problem with heroin and teenagers. And yeah, that's the most recent story I was writing about is because I was fascinated because it was twin brothers, and they both became heroin addicts as teenagers, and it completely screwed up their lives. I mean, they just were in and out of prison like a revolving door forever. And I just thought, whoa, I mean, what are the odds? It's just so weird. But even on the old episodes of Dragnet, like the radio show, and even the early TV show, the ones in black and white, they deal a lot with teenage addiction.
Hmm.
And so it's really curious. That was a big concern, and they didn't know how they were going to reach kids, what they were going to do. And a lot of this had to do with coming out of that Second World War and kids just being on their own. And it was a huge problem. Like you said, though, Ryan, a lot of people think, oh, well, it was the 60s and the 70s and then into the 80s when everyone was doing coke by the ton. But no, I mean, there's always been a problem, like in the 1920s and the 1910s. After
Big
the
thing,
after
yeah.
the after the First World War, there was an uptick in a lot of like laudanum, which is I think it's an opiate, it's a derivative. And so there were lots of things like that. And there were also opiates in patent medicines, or things you could get at the drugstore, cocaine and Coca-Cola, things like that. And so there's just always, if it made you feel good, chances are it had something bad for you in it. But yeah, I mean, there was a huge problem for kids then, and it was just easy because it's the same kind of nonsense that you find anytime you have a teenage brain, which isn't fully formed yet.
Yeah.
Um, somebody can say, I dare you, or they'll try anything once because there's no concept of distant consequences. They barely understand consequences like for the next hour, let alone 10 years down the road. They're not going to get that. And so that's why I was fascinated by that. I've written a lot about drugs, in part because my friend died, and well, I had several friends die of overdoses because I was a child of the 60s and into the 70s, and I knew people. There was a while there when it seemed like every week I knew someone who died. So, it's just it's really, really, really weird. But
Yeah. I'm surprised, or maybe there was there an uptick during Prohibition? It's like, well, if booze is harder to get, should we all turn to alternatives here?
they were both, it was sort of like there was a lot of stuff available. I know in Los Angeles, there were a lot of speakeasies. It wasn't locked. I mean, it the amendment, the Volstead Act only made the manufacture and transportation of liquor illegal. It wasn't the consumption. So, I mean, people who had a budget for it kept a cellar. You were allowed to have a cellar,
Mhm.
with booze in it. Um, but it was one of those laws that was unpopular enough that people, and I attribute a lot of the thumbing your nose at law enforcement now, back to prohibition, because it was a law that was unpopular and people broke it, and people who never broke the law before in their lives really were going to speakeasies. They were buying, everybody had a bootlegger, somebody who would, like the milkman, would come to the door with that fifth of scotch every couple of weeks or every week, whatever, and they all had them. And so it was so commonplace. It was like it became accepted. So once you accept the behavior, the law is not relevant anymore, and so I think that's a lot of what goes on today. Is this like, I think it set up that culture of, well, I don't like it, so I'm not going to do it. And like, well, if it's a bad law, change it. Which, finally they did in 1933. They just went, this experiment is not going like we thought it would. And but
Yeah.
it's just it's weird that these things happen. But I have a story that this one is about a cop behaving badly, and it's down to liquor. This is why he's behaving badly. This is one of my favorite. He's one of my favorite cops from LA, from history, because he's just so outrageous. His name was Ted Swift, and he was a deputy in the LA County Sheriff's Department. In October 1939, um, Ted Swift, I think he'd been out drinking. I don't think it. He'd been out drinking. And he sort of stumbled his way into the Dinner Bell Cafe, which was on Vine Street, just kind of adjacent to the Brown Derby in Hollywood. And he gets in there and he sees two really cute waitresses, and one with Jesse Clark and Clemmy Reeves, and he's like, these two babes are pretty cute. So he makes, kind of a lunch. Well, he's drunk and they don't want any part of it. He thought they might find him irresistible. They did not. And so they just slipped past him. I mean, he was fumbling, he was no, and so he couldn't get his arms around either one of those girls. So he turns his attention, because he's just gone. He turns his attention to this guy who's sitting at the counter. The guy's name was Michael Aronson, and he was kind of having an early breakfast, just having a cup of coffee. And for some reason, Ted took an immediate dislike to Aronson's fedora. He was wearing a fedora. Swift suddenly hated it, and he started to verbally abuse this guy. And the man was so startled that he ran out of the cafe. But he hadn't been able to finish his coffee, and he hadn't been able to leave a tip or anything, pay the bill. So he tried to come back into the cafe, and Swift caught a glimpse of that fedora, and he pulled out his revolver. And it's just like, so, but rather than shoot at the fedora, he turned to the counter, which had pies on it, and he fired on like six custard pies, helpless pies. He's firing on pies. And so all this creamy custard is flying all over the place, and he's shooting at them. And when the smoke cleared, he'd like massacred half a dozen innocent pies in this cafe, and he unloaded this volley of gunfire. The patrons of the cafe like dove under the counter, under the tables to hide. And at this point, a police officer, Monty Sherman, he arrives, and several other squad cars that had detectives and everything else in it. So Ted was shuffled out right away, and
Yeah.
taken to Hollywood Receiving Hospital, where they determined that yes, indeed, Ted was shit-faced. And so so he was then called in front of the undersheriff Arthur Jewell, and Jules was not happy with Ted. This is not, I mean, because it was in the newspaper with a picture of Ted and everything. You don't want this from your deputies. And so he offered him the opportunity to resign or be fired. So Swift was like, oh, okay. He was really popular with the other cops, the other deputies. They liked him. He was a likable guy. It sounds like he was fun at parties, but just don't wear a fedora or hold a cream pie, you know? And so his fellow deputies passed the hat, and they got $75 raised to sort of help pay for the damage he'd done at the diner when he was firing randomly. And so he left the sheriff's department, and he kind of ended up in the growing Southern California aerospace industry. He owned two charter companies. Ted was a pretty sharp guy. He owned two charter companies, Desert Skyways and Swift Air, after his own last name. And then in October 1949, two men were injured and three were killed on Lake Mead, sort of behind Hoover Dam, when the amphibian plane that they were test landing snagged its landing wheels in the water, and it slammed over on its back, and it just burst into flames. And one of the dead was former deputy Ted Swift. So
Oh, wow.
I was really kind of sad, but I love the fact that Swift just took an immediate like to the guy's fedora and wished him harm, and then realizes that, since maybe the guy's head is inside the fedora, not a good idea to shoot at it, we'll just kill some pies instead. No, I've always loved Ted Swift for that. just
Yeah.
because he was a cop behaving badly. They're just human beings. But it's
Yep.
little stories like that, when you find these little bits of, human behavior that you're like, what was he thinking? Clearly he wasn't. He was just drunk, and it seemed like that, like a good idea.
Can't even
Joan,
imagine like what
right?
how gone you have to be to get to that point. That's
To
just
start
crazy.
shooting at pies? It's my favorite part of it. He's just shooting at pies. Bang, bang, bang. They're flying all over the place. People are hiding under the tables. It's chaos, you know?
Like you said, these are like these. If this was a movie, they just write themselves. Like you couldn't make this up. It's
You
just that
can't. You
ridiculous.
can't. And another one I really love. This is another character driven, and they almost always are the ones that really resonate with me. Always
Yeah.
have these characters, and that you just and this guy was named, this is the human fly. This guy was known as the human fly. You got
Wow.
to love a guy known as the human fly. His name, this is 1943. His name was Carl Hopper. He's 22 years old. He's a bandit, a kidnapping suspect, and he made an escape from the Hall of Justice, which is where I volunteer now. The Hall of Justice, because there used to be a jail in the top floors. There was a women's part of the jail and a men's part of the jail. And so that's where they used to hold county prisoners. So he managed to make an escape from it. And because he was so agile, he did, because some people had tried to escape from the Hall of Justice jail before and they died in the attempt, but not Carl. He made it. So they called him the human fly. And police hunted for the fly for several days, and he surfaced in a shoe store on West Lawson, and he'd entered the store and he simulated a gun. He held up the manager, a guy named Hans. He got away with $23. And a
Oh my
private
God.
patrol a private patrolman, a guy named Ed Sheld, heard the ruckus. He saw Hooper fleeing, so he fired a couple shots. Because in those days, if you were on the sidewalk, if you were fleeing from the police or anybody, they just would shoot. So forget the fact that there's innocent people standing around. They just start firing. So he fired a couple of rounds, but they went wild, and Hopper ran to the rear parking lot where he forced a guy named Sam Ten and his wife out of their car, and he drove away in it. So the Tens car was found, abandoned later on in Inglewood. And later on in April, officers answered a prowler call and at the home of a woman named, her last name was Lehigh or something, and she's in Pasadena. And a patrolman, Gerald Wilson, noticed Hopper, and he was limping along the street about a block away from this incident. And Wilson thought, yeah, he thought at first the limping guy thought maybe he's drunk, because he's kind of weaving and bobbing. And so he approached him cautiously, and he took him into custody for public intoxication. But when he was driving to the Pasadena police station, Hopper attacked Wilson in the neck. He took the broadcasting microphone from the car just because he could. He wasn't going to call anyone, and he jumped out. So Wilson gave chase. He caught up with Hopper, um, and Hopper struggled, but Wilson subdued him and got him into the station. So Hopper wouldn't say who he was. He wouldn't talk. And then they confronted him with his fingerprint records and his photo in a police bulletin. It's kind of like, oh, yeah, I guess I'm the human fly. So he confessed, and once he started confessing, like a lot of people, he wouldn't shut up. So he boasted about how he'd eluded police for 2 weeks and on and on. And he says, I'm going to read this because I love it when they speak for themselves. I started for San Francisco hitchhiking, but learned there was a police blockade on the highway, so headed back here. Things went all right until last Thursday when some fellows were chasing me and I broke my leg getting off a little roof. And then the human fly he starts bragging again that he was right under the noses of the cops every single day. They didn't see him. He'd taken a room across from Pasadena Junior College. He bought some collegiate clothes so he could blend in. He's like, the sweater or whatever. And he said that he hung around the malt shop and he mingled with students because he's only 22 years old, so he fit right in. He's mingling with students. He was showing off his leg in a plaster cast, and he said, "Oh yeah, I got an injury in the army." And so police wanted to know how the human fly spent his time after he left the Hall of Justice. And he said when he escaped, he went to the beach and he bought a pair of swimming trunks and he just stayed out all day and laid in the sand and relaxed. And nobody recognized him.
Yeah.
So police booked him. So they took him, they booked him, for the public for the drunkenness in
Yeah.
Pasadena. But then they got him for resisting arrest, vagrancy, suspicion of burglary, and violating the Selective Service Act. They later transferred him to Central Jail and booked him on suspicion of robbery. So they took him to his room over on Harkness Street in Pasadena, but they didn't find anything, except a small bottle filled with water. Hopper said he carried the vial on holdups and told people it was nitroglycerin. He said, "I've got a vial of nitroglycerin. Give me all your money." And he told cops he also used a cap pistol in his robberies. So he didn't even use a real gun. So he was such a slippery guy. So they believed his leg cast might hold hacksaw blades. They thought, oh, he's going to try to make another escape or
Yeah.
something, or gun. So they planned to x-ray the cast just to be sure. But they did, and all they found was his leg. So everyone wanted to hear all the details about the fly's original escape. And he said that he found his way to the 14th floor, which is at the top of the of Hall of Justice, and he lowered himself down a ventilator shaft to the 8th floor, and then he ran. He exited through a window and ran down the stairs. And he said, "I was scared all the time. I'm damned lucky to be alive. The worst part was getting over the hump, the rounded part of the ventilator, and down the side of the firewall. I put one foot inside the ventilator next to the wall and started sliding. Every 4 feet, there was a 2-inch reinforcing flange. So I grabbed that to slow up, and I just about tore my fingers off." So
Oh my.
he told police he wanted to turn around and go back, but he couldn't climb back up into the building. So he got to the 8th floor and then he jumped 6 feet sideways into space and caught a narrow window ledge he was hanging on up, above the concrete of a light well, out of his mind. So he attempted to plead insanity, like I'm just crazy. That's why I do this stuff.
That makes
But
sense. Yeah.
it, I know, but he wasn't really crazy, and he
Um,
he entered a plea of guilty. Then the plea of insanity, he realized that it wouldn't be a good idea. He probably wouldn't be able to get out on parole if he was insane. So he was sentenced to 15 years to life. He admitted to the judge he was already a 50-year parole from San Quentin, and he served 28 months for first degree robbery. So he'd been released in 42 in December, and he just started his life of crime all over again. So he left limping, and he was an amazing escape artist. Um, the judge reminded him. The judge said, um, others had escaped before him. He said, yeah, you're the human fly, but you're not so special. Other guys have escaped before you. But Hopper said, not in the daytime, Your Honor.
Hmm.
So he said he could outrun Jesse Owens, the great Jesse Owens, the Olympian runner, handicap or no handicap. He even offered to prove it if the deputies would turn their backs, but they said no, they
Yeah.
can't trust him. So I love the human fly because he's just I can see him scaling walls in Pasadena and escaping from the Hall of Justice. And
Right.
it's those little stories, those ones that nobody now will even know, that just like that just grab me. And I love the human fly. I think he's just, and you always wonder with people like the human fly, why did he not turn his attention to something else? What makes people with all these different talents, you know, what makes them not just do the right thing?
Yeah.
Why?
It's that
Why?
that structure, I guess, it's or just once you're in it, it's like how do you go and live a clean life? You're like, I already dug a hole, I may as well just keep digging now.
Yeah.
Uh, and we're living through it's a big national news story right now. Like 3 weeks ago, the group of guys broke out of the prison in New Orleans. There's still two at
Yeah.
large. The one guy just uploaded a video. I haven't really followed this too much, but he's trying to dispute his original charge.
Hmm.
Like he's trying to make a case for why he shouldn't have been there in the first place. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on that. But first, I'm curious if you have any thoughts on Frank Morris, the Anglin brothers, the famous Alcatraz escapees in
Ooh,
'62, because that's one of those. As far as I know, that one's still a mystery, right? They never can
I
conclusively
think
say like,
so.
did they get eaten by sharks? Did they actually make it out? What do you think happened to the Alcatraz escapees?
I think that they died. I really do.
Yeah.
And part of the reason is because even if they'd made it, what would be the likelihood that they would then go on to lead normal lives and not get in any kind of trouble again ever?
Mm,
Or it just, I mean, they were in prison for a reason. And it
yeah.
wasn't because they were upstanding citizens. And I just can't see anyone like that.
Yeah. To go.
Because especially like if let's say you escape from Alcatraz, you get away with it. You actually get away with it. And then I think most people have gotten away with something. They're like, I'm not doing that again because I got lucky. But I think people who end up in prison like these guys, I think they'll be more inclined to think, I'm invincible.
Right.
Oh, I just got out of Alcatraz. This is impossible. I got off the rock. No one does that. And I
Just the
can't see
bragging
them.
rights, right? Like if you're gonna compromise, you're like,
Exactly.
I need to tell somebody so they
You
know that I
have
did it.
to.
Like,
You have to. You'd have to tell a family member, or you'd have to talk. You'd have to tell someone. It would just be exploding inside of you day and night. Who are you going to
yeah,
tell? So I think that, they pulled off the escape as far as it went, but I think they died in the bay. I
trying
think
to
they
reach the
died.
shore. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah. And I
because
think
I was gonna say
hypothermia would have gotten them too. That water is cold. It is
exactly. Yeah,
cold.
they had that lousy little raft that wasn't gonna do anything for them.
Mm-mm. That wasn't going to protect them from the cold.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing if you break out and you've got a pile of money waiting for you. You're like, I'm gonna go to South America or Cuba and live out my days.
Yeah.
These guys didn't have money, right? Where were they gonna
No,
go?
I don't think they did. And I mean, it's a great story. And part of you kind of roots for them, like, whoa, that was a daring plan. They really put a lot of work into it to make it go. And so you kind of, part of me wants to see them get away with it. Like, whoa,
You're like
that's
rooting
a
for the bad guy.
yeah, because
Yeah,
it's a bold move. I mean, you just don't escape from Alcatraz. That's wow.
yeah.
But I think they probably died because I just can't see them then fading into obscurity. I just don't see that being part of personalities that would do that in the first place, and then just say, well, learn my lesson. I think I'll just get married, settle down, and be, Joe Smith somewhere.
Yeah. I think you're probably right, unfortunately. I want to believe that they made it and there's this cool story waiting to be told, but I'm like, they didn't
Yeah,
make
they
it.
ended up in some place with, little drinks with little umbrellas in them.
Yeah.
And yeah,
It's like you're not what is it, Griselda Blanca. You're not gonna make
yeah, yeah, I don't
it.
think so.
Well, speaking of
Yeah.
people who repeat their mistakes, tell me about Luis. Hopefully I say this right. Luis Pete, or is it Luis
Oh,
Petey? Because that's a pretty
Louis
crazy
Pete,
one of like you get a second chance and what do you then
you
what
immediately commit another murder. Louise Pete is really one of the most interesting people partly because I believe Louise Pete was a serial killer, really. She had been her whole backstory is kind of fuzzy. Not too much is really known about her. She was born in Louisiana. I forget what parish, but she was born in Louisiana. And I think in the 1910s, she ended up in Texas, where she was, where she killed a man she said was trying to sexually assault her. And Louise was, especially then, because she was a younger woman. She was attractive, and she pitched it to the all-male jury that I was defending my honor. And it was some Texas oil man or something like that she'd been kind of palling around with. Interestingly, though, when she left Texas, he had a large kind of gold and diamond encrusted belt buckle. That was never seen again.
Hmm.
Um, Louise, I think she probably killed him. I don't know if she killed anyone before that. When she got to Los Angeles, she was married a few times. I'm not even sure how many.
Hmm.
But when she gets to Los Angeles, she meets this guy. I think his name is Jacob Denton, and she moves in with him. And I think she was pressuring him to marry her. She always had a plan. She always had a plan, and I think she wanted to be married. She she wanted whatever because he had a house. He had some money, I guess. And so she was pressuring him. He wasn't going for that. He was kind of backing off. And so then he disappears. And Louise had filled the basement of the house with she had a delivery of I don't know how many square feet of soil she had brought to the basement and dumped in there. She said, I was going to grow mushrooms in the basement because it was his favorite food. Well, when Jacob, I don't know, I can't recall the details how Jacob was reported missing, but lo and behold, when they go down into that basement, she's not growing mushrooms. She's hiding Jacob's body. So she goes to trial for it. She's found guilty of the murder. She spends years at San Quentin because before they built the women's prison in Tehachapi in the early 30s, women did time at San Quentin. There was a woman's wing, but you did time at San Quentin, and you can imagine. I mean, it was a situation just meant for abuse on all sides. The women were abused. Innocent women were abused. Other women were taking advantage of idiot, you know, gatekeepers and whatnot. And so it was not a good situation. So they built a women's prison at Tehachapi. But Louise did her time at San Quentin. And I think she might have done 20 years, maybe
Like
even that
almost,
much.
yeah, I think it was almost, she got out in 39, so it's probably like
Yeah.
18 years or so, something like
Yeah,
that.
she did
Yeah.
she did quite a stretch. And then she changed her name, because she didn't want her name to follow her, but she came to LA. She she had a friend. What was the friend's name? Oh, her next
Margaret
victim.
Logan, is that who you're
Thank
thinking
you.
of? Okay.
Margaret
Okay.
Logan. So she knew the Logan. She knew Margaret and she knew Margaret's husband. She'd known them for a long time. I don't know how they made a connection, but she'd known them for a while. So they knew her story and they wanted to help her.
Hmm.
And nice impulse doesn't work out very well for the Logans. They take Louise in. She is kind of not really a housekeeper, but she kind of helps. She supposedly helps out, but that's not what she's really up to. What she's really up to is she wants what they have. And that's always the case. That was always the case with Louise, whether it was jewelry. She was the most inept criminal, frankly, I think I've ever encountered. One of the most inept. She never she never did anything with any finesse or any forethought. She just wanted what you had and she wanted it now. And what the Logans had was a nice house and some property and some other stuff. And she sort of inserts herself in here. And eventually she she kills Margaret Logan. Did she kill Margaret Logan first? Oh, she ends up getting the husband. She pretends to be his sister and has him admitted to an asylum.
Whoa.
Okay. This is evil. This is just flat out evil.
Yeah.
She kills Margaret Logan. She shoots her in the head. She blames it on the husband. Then she has him. I think that's the order. She shoots Margaret. She blames it on the husband, who she said had been getting really crazy, out of control, then pretending to be his sister. Some of the details are escaping me now, but she ends up having him put in an asylum. He dies there. He dies there. She doesn't care. She is meanwhile signing their names to all this different stuff, spending all their money, all the property. Oh yeah, she's buried. No one knows that Margaret's been murdered. She doesn't have to blame anyone. No one knows. She buries Margaret in the garden.
Oh my God.
The house is still there. She buries Margaret in the garden under some flowers. And that so she just the kind of thing that she did with Jacob Denton was the same kind of thing she did with Margaret Logan. When people ask where the person is, there's with Jacob Denton, she had the most insane story. She said that a Spanish woman wielding a sword or a machete had come to the door and hacked off one of his limbs, and he was being fitted for a prosthetic limb, but he was so embarrassed because he didn't know how to use it, he was staying out of sight until he learned to use it. Did no one think that was the most insane thing they'd ever heard?
Yeah.
Apparently not. And she taught, but this was like pure Louise. And when people asked about Margaret, oh, Margaret is having plastic surgery. Margaret is, she's here, she's there, she's everywhere. But so people, then they started to get suspicious. And I'm not sure, I can't recall now, unless you can, Ryan, what made someone finally look for Margaret.
I don't
But
know. Yeah.
there she is under some flowers in the garden once again. And it's Louise. It's just pure Louise. Louise she just looked harmless. When she was younger, she was attractive, so she was an attractive woman, so she didn't look like a killer. And then now she was, kind of a middle-aged woman, and she dressed well because she was wearing Margaret's clothes. And but she she seemed harmless, and she was not. She was a stone cold killer. And she'd married this guy. Oh God, what's his name? I can't think, it'll come to me. But she was married when she was doing all this stuff, trying to steal Margaret and her husband's property, the Logan's property. She had married a guy. The guy didn't even know who she really was. She gave him the name she'd been using. She didn't tell him she was Louise Pete.
Yeah.
He didn't even know. He had
It was
no idea.
easier to get people can't just Google you to check your background
No,
back then.
Yeah.
no,
Start a
no,
new life.
not
Yeah.
at all. People have to take you at face value. If you say, hi, I'm Joan Renner, but I'm really, Louise Pete serial killer, you don't know, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And they, and so she marries this poor guy. And when she's caught, and at first they thought maybe he was involved. He was a total innocent. And to her credit, she said he doesn't know anything about anything. She always claimed to be innocent, but then she'd sometimes sort of confess. She was all over the map. But she he was so distraught because he was taken in. He had no idea who this woman was. And he believed her. He believed everything she said. And when she was going to trial, when she was at trial in court, he threw himself down a stairwell at the Broadway arcade on Broadway Street and killed himself
Hmm.
Oh my
because he
God.
was so distressed. He was so humiliated that he'd been taken in. And he's not the first of her male companions or husbands who had died like something like that.
Oh.
So did she kill them? Did they
Yeah, he
kill
fell
themselves?
down the steps. Sure, yeah.
Yeah, this one actually did because she was
Right.
she was actually on trial at that time, couldn't have pushed him.
I mean, it's what's interesting is it's one thing if you're a serial killer that's still on your run, you've never been caught, and you do the same style, right? But you got caught, you went to jail, you got back out, and you're still a one-trick pony. You're still gonna just bury the body on the property, like creativity. Come on.
No, no, that's where Louise really failed every single time. She never learned. Like most
Crazy.
killers, if you're a serial killer, you usually learn. You get better at it. You start out as an apprentice or whatever. Seriously, you kind of start out like that, then you're a journeyman, then you become an expert. She never did that. She never took those steps. It was always with Louise, it was always blinders. She wanted what someone else had. She wanted it right then, and she was going to kill them to get it. And
Yeah,
she didn't care where the
short-sighted.
chips would fall. And then she'd come up with these absurd stories. I mean, the Spanish woman cutting off the guy's limb. What? What? And then it's stories like that. She was completely insane. So she ends up this time, she she doesn't go to prison this time. She actually gets the death penalty.
Yep.
She gets the death penalty. And she was the second. of four women ever executed in the state of California. And it's when Aggie Underwood, my favorite reporter, of course, was involved in this story too. She knew Louise. She was interviewing Louise when Louise was in LA, when she was first tried and convicted and stuff before they shipped her off to San Quentin. She ended up, I think, going to Tehachapi for part of it, but they execute you at San Quentin. And the way Aggie always was able to connect with people pretty easily. And with Louise Pete, she said she never called her because the other reporters would say, "Hey, Louise," and she always addressed her as Mrs. Pete because she said because Louise always saw herself as a Southern lady. That's how she saw herself. And she was very vain. And so one time when Aggie visited her in the jail, uh, Louise couldn't dye her hair because she's in jail. So Aggie bought her an eyebrow pencil and literally, and Louise colored individual strands, gray strands of her hair with this eyebrow pencil before she went to court. But it was a way of establishing a rapport. And so Louise once said to Aggie, Aggie, you and I are a lot alike. Aggie's thinking, I don't think we are. But, we're both kind of on our own. Your children are grown and, you don't have anyone. When I get out of this, you might need a housekeeper. Oh,
No.
no, no, tell you what, Mrs. Pete, I'm fine. I'm okay on my own. But, but yeah, so but Louise, like she, right to the end, she's playing the whole, she understood she was going to be executed. She wasn't stupid. But she didn't seem to care all that much. She passed out. There's a photograph of her hand, of her hand, I think, passing out. She had a box of chocolates, passing them out to reporters who'd come to report on her execution.
Wow.
And she told Aggie, don't feel too bad about me, honey. I mean, everyone's time comes, and it's like, okay, you know.
She
So
had a good run, all right.
she had a
Did
good
it.
run, and she would have done it. She would have done it forever.
Hmm.
She would have just repeated over and over and over again. The only reason she didn't kill during that time she was because she was in prison. That's why, and who knows what she did before or since, because I like, I think that the fact that her background is so murky, there was a book that was written about her, I think in the 50s, and they talked a little bit about her past, but it's really difficult when you try to search Louise, when you try to like get a family tree, it's very difficult. I haven't tried recently, but a few years ago I did, and it was frustrating because it was just one dead end. And women are hard to track sometimes anyway because they marry, they change their names.
Yeah.
Um, it's really difficult. And so her backstory is really murky because I think she was like a lot of criminals. She lies about her background, and I think Louise may have said that she was the daughter of somebody wealthy, and I don't think she was. It's just she went to but there's rumors that she went to a private school, but she was expelled for being sexually active. The truth is just it's in there, but we don't know what it is. Hard to say.
Yeah, she's a weird case for sure.
She is. And to be executed, I mean, California, well, now we don't execute anyone, but when we did, certainly didn't execute women. And that's always been a tough sell for people. Most places, unless you're Texas, really, they don't execute people. Florida, Texas, but they don't execute, the women aren't routinely executed, not at the same rate that men are ever. And so the last execution of a woman in California was in 1962. And that was Ma Duncan.
I wanted to ask you, Joan, because I know you handle the archives. You work very closely with all of the archives in LA. Is
Yeah.
there an obscure case of like a cover up you found? Like, there was a lot of wealthy people in LA back then establishing LA, or what they call Hollywood land. And
Yeah.
did you, in your archive adventures, did you find anything like that where a family, there was a murder or there was something where they covered it up and the police helped with that, or anything crazy like that in your archive?
The only thing that I can think that was really high profile that was probably a cover up was the the murder suicide, the so-called murder suicide of oh God, at Greystone. What was the family's name? They were really rich. Google it. Help me out here. I can't.
Ryan's on it.
Yeah.
Uh,
The
Google it.
Plunkett,
We must Google.
was
Google
it
now.
Hugh Plunkett or was that the murderer?
Yes, Hugh Plunkett
Okay.
was the secretary, and the other guy, get the other name. Ned,
Ned Doheny or Doheny.
Doheny. There
Doheny.
it
There
is.
you go.
Doheny. Okay. Oh,
Gosh, we
thank you
have
so much.
Doheny Avenue in Hollywood, actually.
Absolutely. And the Doheny Mansion is still, it still exists. It's beautiful. Actually, Mr. Doheny had bought that. I turned on the lights on my, what am I doing here? Oh, for God's sake, Joan. There we go. Um, yeah, so that one I think, okay, so what happened was this was in the 1920s. Forget
Okay.
what year, okay? And um and uh the elder Doheny, the senior Doheny had built this Doheny mansion for his son and for his son's family, for his wife, and so there was and Hugh Plunkett was a good friend of Ned's. Was Ned, right? Was it Ned Doheny? So he was a good friend. They were friends. I think they might have even gone to school together, but he didn't come from money like Doheny. Doheny was money, like big money.
Yeah.
Oil money.
46,000 square foot mansion,
Yeah,
like
it's
big
gorgeous.
time. Oh,
Unbelievable.
Wait, it's still around? We still
Oh
have it here?
yeah. Oh
I
yeah.
can
If
visit
you
there.
go, if you
Like,
yeah,
what?
and sometimes they have events there. They have a I think it's taken I think it's owned now by some sort of trust or something. Look into it because you can sometimes get in there for events. They sometimes do things. It's unbelievable. But so what happened was um there was this supposed it was a murder suicide, okay? And this is where I think the cover up comes in. Um the murder suicide, it's literally hours before anyone contacts the police. Hours. And I think that the scene was staged. I think they moved the bodies. I don't know exactly what the deal was, but whatever it was, they blamed the murder. They said that Hugh Plunkett killed Ned Doheny. And I don't know that that's really true. And the it like I said, hours, literally hours. They called their own doctor. I mean, all the things rich people do. They call somebody else in. You know, they might have called an attorney before they even called the police. They called the police because they got two dead bodies. Eventually, they have to call the police.
yeah.
And
Still
this
Spectre Town?
guy, yeah. And so the guy that shows up was an investigator in the district attorney's office, and his name was oh gosh, Leslie T. White. And Leslie White was, he'd started his career sort of out in Ventura County on horseback. And he ended up in Los Angeles and he ended up working as an investigator in the DA's office. And he went out to the scene and he was one of the first people on the scene. And he thought it was hinky as hell. He said, this, and it wasn't really covered. If you try to find coverage in like in the LA Times, there's just a brief mention of it. And this is huge. I mean,
Yeah.
this is huge. This is Doheny's son. He's been murdered. He's lying there in his bathrobe on the floor, and the whole thing just stunk to high heaven. And Leslie White gets there. He talks to some of the family who would talk, not very cooperative. And he just said no. There's this whole thing is just wrong. I know it's wrong. I don't know what really happened, but I know that what they're telling me is not the truth. And so he goes back to the DA. I forget who was DA at the time. I forget. But he goes back to the DA and he said, "Look, we got to do something. There's something really wrong here." And the DA basically does like the ending of the movie Chinatown. Forget about it. White, it's Doheny. You can't do anything. And I think part of what was going on there was, and I'm sure there was a cover up. There's no doubt in my
Yeah,
mind,
for sure.
no doubt at all. And
Yeah.
but what was happening was is that um, Doheny Sr. had been involved in this thing. It was the Teapot Dome scandal with some land, leasehold land or something. There was something really bad going on in terms of bribes and money and oil. You know, wherever there's a lot of money,
Always, yeah.
potential for bad behavior suddenly,
Exactly.
yeah, it
Yeah.
exponentially increases. And so Doheny, I think, was going to avoid any kind of hmm, legal issues by maybe paying someone off. The deal was, as far as my understanding is, and I'm not sure, but I think what was going to happen was they were going to have Hugh Plunkett deliver some bribe money to someone, and I think they were going to drop a dime on Hugh and throw him under the bus.
Hmm.
And I think that Hugh realized it. I think he may have been arguing with Ned in the bedroom wherever they were, and something happened. But I think that I'm not sure who shot whom. But I think there was so much more. So that's definitely a cover up. And that one is still just drives people mad, because when you start poking into it, it's like, but the best, it's a small chapter, but there's a book called Me Detective, written by Leslie White. And Leslie White talks about his time in the DA's office. I think Leslie White, he eventually ended up writing fiction, like detective fiction. And I think he may have been the first or one of the first in the Screenwriters Guild or something. He did a lot. He did a lot in LA, but he's really an interesting character, and you can find it. So I think you might be able to find it online in the Internet Archive thing. I think there might be copies of it there. If not, ask me. I think I have a copy somewhere, digitized. But it's really interesting. But that for sure was a cover up because there was huge money involved. There was a lot at stake. Doheny was already in trouble for this Teapot Dome thing, which is a whole other story taking
Yeah.
place in DC. So, yeah, but that for sure, that's a Hollywood one. Other people have other things that they think were cover-ups, like Thelma Todd dying in her car in the 30s,
I was
35,
just
whatever.
Yeah, I was gonna segue into that because I was gonna
Do
say I
it.
love you got me watching film noir like most nights now, and I think this was on your YouTube channel, By Whose Hand? It's like the one on
Hmm.
the train. So good. So I was like, we got to talk about some old movie stars, and I was gonna say Thelma Todd. That's a weird one. So please, yes, we'll just give us like
Yeah,
the short of she was found dead in her car in 35, and
yeah.
that one is still is that
It's
unsolved still?
Well, no, they never considered it a homicide. I think they ruled it
Okay.
an accidental death. But what I really think happened, I don't think there was a cover up there. I think they explored a lot of theories. She lived there. Was on it's the building's still there, and it's on Pacific Coast Highway, Malibu area. And she had a cafe there, Thelma Todd's Cafe. She lived above it. There were some stairs going from street level up to where she lived. And then her lover, a director, Roland West, lived above her in a house above, up on the hill with his wife. But they were in the same house, but he would come down most times and stay with Thelma. But she went to a party. She was going to a party, I think at Ciro's or something, some nightclub. It was being thrown in her honor by uh, Ida Lupino. Ida Lupino, the actress, and Ida Lupino's father. They were throwing this party for Thelma, and there was a lot of people going to be there. One of the people was uh, Thelma's ex-husband, who was kind of a small-time gangster. His name escapes me now, but he was a smarmy little guy.
Had
He
the sicko. I
Yeah,
think
DeSico, Pat
Mexico.
DeSico.
Yeah.
And so he was he was at the party, they were, but before she left for this party, Roland West didn't accompany her. She went, she had her, I think she had her usual driver maybe take her, but she he said he was kind of a controlling guy, and he said, I want you home at midnight. And Thelma was not the kind of woman to, just say, okay. She said, I'll be here at a minute after if I feel like it. So she goes off to the party, and then she comes back. I think the driver drops her off. Um, as far as I know, she went up to try the door. I think Roland West may have locked the door to the apartment so she couldn't get in. I think he'd done this to her before. She went out to her car in the garage, which is up on the hill, sort of behind, it's not street level, it's up on the hill. She goes up to her garage, and she had a 16-cylinder Lincoln in there. That was her car, 16. So it was a big car. It was a Phaeton or something, big car. So
Yeah.
she gets in this car, and it's cold. It's January or December.
Mhm.
And
Okay.
so it's cold out. And
Yeah.
it's late at night. By this time, it's way past midnight. I think it's like, 2 o'clock in the morning. So she's cold. She can't get
Yeah.
into her apartment. She goes up into her car. I don't think she was drunk. She might have been a little tipsy. She goes into the car. Um, she probably turned on the car for the heater, for the
Yeah.
warmth. I think, here's what I think happened. I've got no proof. This is just the Joan theory. Okay, what I think happened is that she was in the car. She's still, wrapped in her silver fox or mink or whatever she had on. She's a gorgeous woman. She's in the car trying to keep warm, figuring out what she's going to do. But the garage doors are open. They're open. I think they slide. I think they were sliding, not up and down. But anyway, they're wooden. And she's in this garage with this 12-cylinder Lincoln. And I think what happened was, I think Roland West saw her. I think he came down. I think went up, actually saw her in the garage in the car. I think he thought, I'll teach her a lesson, and closed the doors thinking she would just get sick, not realizing that the carbon monoxide from this huge engine would kill her in
Yeah.
minutes, probably. And so I think that's what happened. I think he did it. I think it was an accident. I, but no one knew for sure. She had a bump on her head that people thought maybe someone had hit her. I don't know. I don't think it was a very big injury. Could have been from bump, maybe she hit the steering wheel. I don't know. She was found sort of slumped over, kind of out the driver's side. She was found like that. And there's, photographs of her at the scene. And so she's there. And I really do think Roland West, I think it was an accident. At the very least, it was involuntary manslaughter. I think he meant to teach her a lesson, make her sick, and didn't realize what the consequences would be. And partly, uh, well, I don't know if this is true or not, but later on, he was good friends with another actor, Chester Morris. Chester Morris played Boston Blackie in the movies, stuff like that. I love the Boston Blackie stuff. He played him in the movies. Boston Blackie was also a radio show. Some guys played Boston Blackie on the radio. But Chester Morris was a good friend of Roland West. They'd worked together too. They'd done some, some movies together. Roland had directed him, I think. And
Oh,
so on his deathbed, I think that Roland West allegedly, this is according to Chester Morris, confessed to doing that. Then that was an accident. But who knows? There's nothing, it's just he said, he didn't say, you don't really know. But I think that one was always thought to be a cover-up, partly because the Thelma Todd Cafe was in such a great location, and it was a destination. A lot of our movie star friends came out there. A lot of people with money who wanted to hobnob with movie stars came out there. And the story is that Lucky Luciano, from New York, the gangster, wanted to put gambling on one of the floors in there, and she didn't want it.
Mhm.
And so people said, well, Luciano probably had her killed. Probably not. Luciano, not that there were great guys. I mean, mostly they didn't kill women, and they would have found another way to
Exactly.
convince her that it was a good idea if that was really the case. I think Lucky Luciano had nothing to do with Thelma Todd's death. And so but did he try to get gambling in her I wouldn't be surprised, sure. A lot of the Eastern gangsters were trying to find a way in to LA. They weren't too successful. They never really were because like I think I've said before, the corruption was mostly in City Hall, top down. So if they sensed anyone coming in from the east, they turned them right back around on the train and sent them back to Chicago or New York, wherever they came from. So I don't think, Lucky came out here, but I don't think he had much more luck than anybody else had had before him. But I think that's another one that really, it's still, people still argue about whether or not Lucky Luciano had her killed or, something else because there's supposedly a friend of hers got a woman that she knew. There was some party going on, maybe the next day or so after Thelma had been out at the club. And but she was already dead. But this woman said she received a phone call from Thelma Todd. She knew Todd's voice. They were friends, but the timing, I don't know if it was ever, I don't think it was ever really established to a certainty. So I don't know. And there were some people who thought that, there were all these theories about how and what and who, but I really do believe that it was just one of those tragic, stupid things that people do. I think
Yeah.
Roland West just thought, she didn't do what I told her to do, and I'm going to get even. I'm going to make her sick. She's going to be sorry, and that'll be the end of it. But it
It's
killed her.
got to be tough for police too, where if you're already associated with certain people and then something happens, people are
Yeah.
going to jump to conclusions, and you're like, well, hang on. I know it
Yeah.
looks,
It
let's
looks,
Right.
wait till we
yeah,
get all the facts. Or it's like, oh, of course this happened, but it's like dumb mistakes do happen too sometimes, and
they
it's
do. Well, what's
interesting.
interesting again, and Aggie Underwood once again finds her way into this story. She said that she talked to a cop who said that gave her the impression that there was more to Thelma Todd's death than met the eye.
Hmm.
She never went much further than that. She didn't, because she didn't have any evidence, but she always felt uneasy about it. But despite that, and all due respect to Aggie, I still think my theory is the best one that
Yeah,
I think it makes the most sense given their personalities, given who Roland West was, and the fact that he may have confessed it to Chester Morris when he was dying.
that's a good point. Yeah. Otherwise, it's a sophisticated enough job that if it looks like an accident, the heat's off,
Yeah.
and we can make it go away. But you got to get pretty lucky to
Yeah,
not
because I
leave
think that
any
would
clues that poke a hole in that. You got to be airtight.
Yeah, because otherwise would have, I mean, it would have been a crime of opportunity then because she went out to the car voluntarily. There's nothing that shows, although people say, well, if she walked up those stairs to her apartment, why were the soles of her shoes not scuffed and dirty? I have no answer for that.
Hmm.
Did she take them off and carry them when she was going up the stairs? Maybe they were hurting her feet. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know. There's
I've got.
always,
I have a few more movie stars. I know we don't have too much more time, so maybe I'll
yeah.
get one more in, then I'll let Jennifer. I'm hogging the show here.
No,
No,
no, you go ahead.
I wanted
This
to
is
ask you about Gene Spangler's disappearance because that
oh,
one,
I'm so glad you
I'm
did.
sure there's a weird story you've got in that one.
There is. Gene Spangler is one actually I wanted to talk about today because this one because we talk about when you talk about the 1940s, mostly you're talking about, like the Black Dahlia case, the women who died. But Gene Spangler disappeared.
Yeah,
She just disappeared. And they never found her body and they never really found out what happened to her. They found her handbag at the one of the entrances to Griffith Park, but they never and it was a note, and the note said something like because Jean Spangler was an actress up and coming. She hadn't had any big roles, really. She was, I think, at the time maybe had a role in A Young Man with a Horn, and it starred Kirk Douglas. He was the star of that one, and she was up and really, really very pretty woman. She had an ex-husband. I think his name was Bennett. or something. He was a plastics manufacturer. They had a child together, Christine.
Dexter Benner.
Dexter, that's it.
Yeah.
And they had a child together. I think her name was Christine or something. And they were divorced at this time. And when on the night she disappeared, Jean said she lived in an apartment with her mom, who was at that time out of town visiting someone, and with her sister-in-law, who was, I think, at that point the widow of Jean's brother, who died in the war, I think. And then the daughter, Christine, they all lived in the apartment. The women lived all there together, and the little girl. And Jean told her sister-in-law, Sophie, I think her name was Sophie. She said, Sophie, I'm going out. I have a night shoot, something like that. I'm doing this thing, and I will be back. I'll be back about midnight, something like that. She tells her. So Sophie was going to watch Christine. She's watching Christine, and then Jean left, and people saw Jean having, I think, a hot dog with some guy over by maybe Farmer's Market, and so a couple people saw her there.
Mhm.
And it was interesting because she had said she was on the set, I think it was the set of Young Man with a Horn, and one of the guys, I don't know if it was one of the crew or could have even been Kirk Douglas, I don't know. But someone said, gee, you look really happy, or you're kind of glowing. And Jean had said, well, I'm seeing someone, because they said, are you seeing someone? She said, yeah, but it's not really serious, but I'm having a really good time. So I think it was one of the crew that asked her that. But she never revealed who the person was. So she calls later, I think, and tells Sophie, no, I'm not going to be home until about 2 o'clock. Well, she didn't show, and she didn't show, and Sophie got worried because it wasn't like her to just not show up and she didn't show up the next day. So she files a missing re persons report, but the police are kind of like, yeah, she's an actress, she's a grown up, she probably went, who knows where she went? We don't even know, but they didn't find her. And so then they finally start looking for her. That's when they find her handbag and a note in it that says something about, I think there's a note about Kirk, and I have to see Dr. So and so before mom comes home. And it sounded from the note like she was maybe pregnant and going to have it terminated. And she
Oh.
was telling this guy, Kirk, that who was then ostensibly the father, that she was going to do it, but she never had a chance to give him the note. It was still in her handbag.
Oh.
There's also people had seen her before with Davy Ogle. Davy Ogle was kind of a low-level gangster guy, mob guy, and Davy was one of Mickey Cohen's guys, basically. That's who he was. And Ogle and Spangler they were going out. They were seen together at clubs and stuff. He might have been the guy with whom she was having a good time. It was also speculated, and this is weird, before the police even got to Kirk Douglas, he came to see them.
Oh,
And I think he already had a lawyer in tow, but he was saying, well, I knew she was. Yeah, I saw her on the set or something like that, but nah, 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 you know. So was he the Kirk? Don't know. But they couldn't find her. They couldn't locate her. Interestingly, Davy Ogle also disappeared. Okay. Same time, basically maybe within a day or so. He's
Oh.
also missing. So Davy Ogle and Gene Spangler are both missing at the same time. There were stories that, because they never find her body, they never find Davy either. And so there were stories that suggest that the two of them ran off together. They were supposedly spotted in Arizona at a motel. That was never ever, verified. And so that's another just mysterious. She just vanishes off the planet, and so does Davy. So were they together? There's so many ways it could go. Were they together? Did they see something or know something they shouldn't? Were they both taken out? Was Jean murdered by the guy? Maybe she was pregnant. Maybe the boyfriend.
Yeah.
There's just no way of knowing because there's no bodies in either of these disappearances. No bodies. No Davy. No Jean. And they looked really hard at her ex-husband, of course,
Right.
but he had an alibi that checked out and he didn't do it. And it was just one of those things, and you don't hear much about it because it's overshadowed. It's in the same, I think it's in all, so I think 1949 is when she disappears, I think.
Yeah.
And so, but it's still in that same post-war period, and but people talk about the Dahlia case, but she just flat out disappeared and just is gone from no one knows where, no one's
Right.
found her body. There was a good book, a fiction. I think it was maybe if it wasn't her first novel, it was close to it. And by Megan Abbott. I like Megan Abbott a lot. I've met her before. Really nice, good writer. And she wrote a book, and I think it was called Bury Me Deep. I think she wrote Queen Pin was her first book, and I think Bury Me Deep might have been after that. But it's a fictionalized version about this, and in it, Jean lives, and it sort of like follows what happened. But it's really interesting because no one ever found anything other than Jean's handbag with that note in it, and so there was always some speculation because her mom said, yeah, there was this guy that came a couple times to pick her up, but he wasn't a gentleman because he didn't come to the door. Was
Hmm.
that Kirk Douglas?
I think,
Douglas was
yeah,
married.
like she had someone named Kirk, but she couldn't confirm who. She
Yeah,
didn't see him.
yeah.
But the other one,
Douglas
like,
was,
because this is part of what I think. Like, so in the note it says whatever, like Dr. Scott, and the
yeah,
police
yeah.
looked for a Dr. Scott and couldn't find him. But what if this is, a mob doctor or the doctor for the stars? And they're like, no, we
Right,
know
there's
who he is, but
always.
I don't know who that is.
Yeah,
Like,
nobody wants to get involved. Nobody.
yeah,
And
I mean
especially if
that's
you have this connection between Davy Ogle and Gene Spangler. So then you have this Hollywood thing and a possible mob connect. You don't want any part of that. You want
Right.
to
what
stay
is
as
it with
far away.
these beautiful Hollywood stars falling in with these gangsters? What draws them to these guys? Is it the money?
Oh,
Is it the lifestyle? It's like you should know better, right? But why there was so
I,
much of that?
I think people just it was like the same thing, like when Ben Siegel arrives in Hollywood, perhaps thinking that he's going to make movies like his friend George Raft or whatever. Because, Ben wasn't a bad looking guy. He was a thug. And I just don't see him making a career. But he had ambitions. But I think he never had any shortage of people who wanted to hang out with him. And I think a lot of it was the vicarious thrill. This is a bad guy, but he's in this situation, so he won't misbehave. He's at this social situation. So it's kind of like it's just like this thrill, this rush. It's adrenaline. You're next to a bad guy who you heard that he was
Yeah.
actually part of Murder Incorporated back in New York, you
Murder
know,
Inc.
and
Yeah.
people call him Bugsy, not to his face.
Yeah.
But so I think that's it. I think it's just kind of the thrill. And he never had any trouble, he never had any trouble finding women. Obviously Virginia Hill, for instance, was his girlfriend I don't think Hill ever really loved him, frankly. I think she was just there. I think she was keeping an eye on him in part for the New York mob. And I think, she got a kick out of him. He was maybe probably fun to party with, and he gave her gifts, but I don't think she was really in love with him. But
They
that's
must have
just
been
me.
really fun parties to justify. Like there has to be that bit in the air of like, hey, this is fun, but this could go south so
This could
quick.
go really
Like,
soon.
why am I, like you just feel some tension in the room, I'm sure. I mean, maybe not, but
Yeah.
that's what I always
Well,
imagine.
I think sensible people do. People who are, it's the hubris. It's sort of the Hollywood hubris. It's I'm special, nothing bad can touch me.
Yeah.
And I think it was really prevalent then
And if this
because they
big
did
shot is
kind
gonna
of
help
live.
get me, like he's bad, but he's gonna get me doing my good thing to the next tier. So it's
Yeah.
just,
Yeah.
yeah,
And he
justify it.
has money. He has money. Maybe he can do something for me. He knows people. He knows George Raft. And Raft, I think, was kind of a dick sometimes to women. I think there was a couple of women who didn't go too well with him, but not surprising. But yeah, but Siegel, I think when he came out to Hollywood, I think he had a couple of ambitions. And I think one of them was that he really thought he could do the movies.
Yeah.
And I also think that he was sort of trying to do some legit stuff, but he was a thug from the time he was a little kid in New York. He was a career criminal. He started out as a kid, misbehaving, and he had there was nowhere good for him to go. I mean, there was been, but he's another one. Like, who shot him? Don't know.
Yeah.
We figure it's really interesting because what happened with Ben, he was murdered in June of 1947. So 47 was kind of a big year for crime. Dahlia in January, Siegel in June. He's in the house that Virginia Hill had been renting in Beverly Hills, and he'd just come back from out to dinner with a party or something. He's sitting on the sofa reading the LA Times, and he had the window open, the drapes to the window open, and he was shot through the window, and it came in and blew one of his eyes across the room, and he just was dead instantly. But what had happened was the guy that I think they had one of the servants, I think he had gotten up a couple nights before because he heard something, but really he was, I think, stealing liquor from the bar. I think he was having himself a little cocktail, but he heard something outside. And what I think that noise that he heard were the assassins, Ben's assassins, out there finding the best spot
Mm.
to shoot into the living room if they got the shot. And so, I forget what he was shot with, but I think it was something routinely used in the military. So it would be perfect for that kind of a maneuver because they weren't that really, and they were out by the bushes. The shooter or shooters were out by the bushes. That wasn't that far from the window, so they had a good clear. When he was sitting there like an idiot with the drapes open, reading the paper, they had a clear shot, and they were gone before the Beverly Hills police could even arrive. They were gone. They were probably halfway to New York by the time anyone even started really asking questions. And I think what happened was that somebody called in, some out of town shooters.
Makes
Because
sense.
what I really think, because people say, well, they had him killed because he overran the costs on the Flamingo. I don't think that's really what happened. He did do that, but I don't think that's why. I think he was an informer. I do.
Mm.
What makes you think
I,
that?
some things I've read here and there, I just got the impression that maybe Ben had a secret and he seemed to get away with stuff maybe he shouldn't have gotten away with. And I think he got to a point in his career where he realized, how is Ben going to do the best for Ben? And sometimes the best thing you can do is turn informant. So I think he might have been an informant for the feds. And I think his friends may have learned of it and decided to take him out for that. The old cost overrun, they made it once. Las Vegas, they made it back in spades. Not a problem. But because it was sort of a dismal opening when he opened it. Remember Rosemary from if you ever caught the Dick Van Dyke Show on reruns on
Oh
TV?
yeah.
Rosemary, she always had the little bow in her hair.
Yeah.
She was an entertainer. She was opening night for the Flamingo.
Hmm.
Wow.
She said Ben was very pleasant. So, but yeah, but it rained, so people who were supposed to come in from LA couldn't make it. It was raining buckets. So the opening was just totally dismal, and not all the rooms were completed. It was a nightmare. But once he got those things sorted, it was going to be a cash cow.
Yeah.
Did you ever there was a show that it was on maybe like 8 years ago. Not the movie Get Shorty. They made Get Shorty into a TV series. Did you happen to
Yeah.
see that?
No, I love
It's
the movie and I love the book.
Oh, I mean, if you love the movie, this show is hilarious.
I gotta see it. I
Ray
gotta see it.
Romano is in it.
Oh, I love Ray Romano. He's
It's
good.
he's like a hitman for the mob in this like dinky town in like Nevada, I guess. And they're having him go out to Hollywood for something, and while he's there, he secretly starts trying to become a movie producer, and the mob doesn't know, and then they find out. Oh my, if you can find it, you have to
I'm
watch that.
looking.
It's
I'll
so
look
good.
for it. I love that kind of stuff. But yeah, I mean, those are cases that have like an interesting connection. Like Thelma Todd had sort of a mob connection and a Hollywood. Ben Siegel definitely did. You can't, especially then, back in the day, you can't really, the two don't separate that easily
Mhm.
because my personal opinion is that Louis B. Mayer was probably the biggest gangster of them all.
Yes, I'm pretty sure.
And I might have mentioned this before. One of the reasons I believe that is because he had a police force. Like, literally, they had MGM had its own police force that had police powers, just like LAPD, just like LA County Sheriff's Department. They had their own police force. They had their own chief of police. I think his last name was Hendry. And I mean, talk about if if Louis B. Mayer asked his police force to do something, what do you think they'd say?
Yeah.
Yes, boss.
Right.
And so I think when Paul Byrne, uh what's her name's husband, the platinum blonde, help me
Gee,
out here.
no.
Yes, Jean
Gee,
Harlow. When
Oh,
Jean
okay, okay.
Harlow's husband allegedly committed suicide,
yeah.
they it was for the longest time they absolutely trashed his reputation to sort of save Jean Harlow's career. And to her credit, she never went along with that. She never spoke ill of him. I think she really cared about him. He was a genuine guy. And it wasn't until years later, I think not until recent decades, that some photographs surfaced that had been taken at the scene. And it was shown that the gun was it was not a suicide. They'd moved it. They'd moved the weapon. And this was all down to MGM. And so when you have your own police force, the opportunity for corruption is just incredible. You got to figure. So I think that in my mind, Louis B. Mayer was right up there. I think he was a bigger gangster than Ben Siegel was. I think he had more juice, certainly out here, than Ben had.
Well,
So,
isn't it rumored that the mob was investing a lot of money in Hollywood?
oh yeah.
So
Totally.
I
Oh
feel like
yeah.
there was like a huge tie there. For the record, I think Bugsy Siegel is so handsome. I've always been a fan.
Nice looking guy. Nice looking guy.
I'm like, oh my God.
Total, total psychopath. Total psychopath.
Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely no conscience. Anyone who was Murder Incorporated, Ben killed because he enjoyed it. It didn't bother him one little bit. It was fine with
Yeah.
him, and he didn't care.
Hey,
And so yeah, but no, he was a nice looking guy. And
oof.
when they
Hey.
show him there's that one photograph of him when he's in this goofy sports jacket, and you think, what the hell are you doing in that sport?
Yeah.
It's like checkered and stuff. He looks like he's wearing a clown suit or something. What are
Yeah,
you
I've seen
Because he
it.
always was very meticulous about his appearance, and he spent a
Yes.
ton of money on his clothes and everything, his ties, shirts, everything. And I found out the reason is he was, I forget where it was, he'd been arrested or something had happened. He didn't have his jacket. He borrowed a jacket from one of the cops.
No.
With
Oh
that
my God.
loud,
No
with that
wonder.
loud, ridiculous jacket, which I'm so happy answered that question for me because I thought, what is Ben Siegel, who would have been GQ material, doing in that hideous
Yeah.
jacket? And that's what it was. It was a loaner. It was not his. Never spent a moment in his closet ever.
You guys asked an interesting question why women fall for like criminals. There's a name for that. There's like there's women that have fascination for like going with
I
people.
Hybristophilia.
There you go. You knew it. I was like, please give me the name, Joe. Yeah.
Hybristophilia. It's a paraphilia. It is a person who's sexually aroused by bad acts, people who commit bad acts. Unfortunately, most hybristophiliacs are women. That's a weakness. I don't know what we're thinking as women when we do that, but it's hybristophilia. And that's what we would normally call someone like a serial killer groupie or something like that would be, that would be it. And it's a paraphilia. So it's hybristophilia. That's the vocabulary word of the evening.
Yeah.
That I don't understand. I don't understand women that can be attracted. I can understand it from a perspective. When I was younger, I felt like I always liked the bad guy. I dated this guy that would like hustle and steal and stuff. And I thought it was so cool. I was like, yeah, he's bringing me all the stolen merchandise, and that's wonderful.
They're
But
fun. They're fun.
yeah,
With any luck at all, you grow out of that fast. But
yeah,
I
yes,
mean,
you do.
But
it's
there's
like,
like male
yeah,
behavior
it's a
too,
good
like
time. But I mean, I think like early on in your dating time, that's the time to explore inappropriate companions.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
when you get to a certain point, you're like, no, 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 no. I don't want to be involved in this nonsense. No, I don't. But in terms of the hybristophilia and why women do that, there's a book called Women Who Love Men Who Kill. And I'm trying to think of the woman who wrote it. I can't think of her name right now. But part of her theory is that for some women, because some women have they have really low self-esteem and they want to be in a relationship, but this is a when you think about it, if you're with a guy who, for instance, is in prison, this accounts for women who get involved with guys who are in prison for life,
yeah.
serial killers, that kind of thing, they marry them or they write to them, they think they have a relationship. It's because it's safe. To them, this is an alpha male, the ultimate alpha male. But you're safe. And it's also, I think she explains it like it's not dirty socks on the floor. It's not, you know, it's sort of this, you get a part of his bad reputation just by being a part of his life, but you don't have to do anything. And so they feel attached to this alpha male figure. And but what happens if this guy gets out of prison? And most of the time, that doesn't go that well. But I don't know if I remember to tell you, but when I was doing when we were still doing crime bus tours before we started doing walking tours with this
yeah,
company I work with, we were doing one that's mostly on the east side of LA. And we talk about Richard Ramirez and stuff. So I was talking about Richard Ramirez and how he had a bunch of women and he married Darlene Leoy. She married him. She ultimately divorced him, but I don't know, I guess she snapped to her senses. But we're talking about, I'm talking about hybristophilia and that. And I pulled out a thing from a prison pen pal site and
yeah,
said, like, we showed the picture up on the screen. This could be your fantasy felon, if you want to write to the guy. And there are women who advertise too on some of these sites, write to this woman. Um, be aware that they're not necessarily telling you the truth about anything, but
yeah.
you can. And the funniest thing though, so I was telling this whole story and I was like, oh, I don't know if that's such a good idea. So at the break, this couple comes up to me and the woman says, I met him that way. He was in prison.
Wow.
Oh
I'm
my
like,
God.
whoa, I said, awkward moment for me.
You're like, I'm sorry.
Yikes. I wish I'd have known before someone was on the bus who met that way. But they'd actually been together for a long time at this point when I met them and they were doing fine. But that is very unusual.
Yeah.
It doesn't generally work out that well. So that's part of an explanation. So that's but look for that book, Women Who Love Men Who Kill. And then she does go into some detail about why she thinks I think she's a psychologist or something. Is kind of
Okay,
interesting.
doctor. I've got one more then. So this
Okay.
is this is random, but I think it's maybe connected because I was it was like a video of these kids just goofing around and it's like a little party. They're like teenagers probably. They're on whatever floor. And one of the boys hangs off the edge of the balcony like, "Woo, look at what I'm doing." And then comes back. And I did stuff like this when I was a young teenager where
Of course you did. Everybody.
why do boys do dumb things that they think the women will be impressed by? Like, look at how we were gonna crush beer cans on her head, and the girl's like, "Cool, bro. Like, I that's not impressive." But God, something in our brain is like thinks that's
I
gonna work.
I think it's pure like ganglia, like that very base instinct. I think it goes back to when you guys were, banging woolly mammoths over the head and dragging them to
Yeah,
caves. I don't believe that biology is destiny by any stretch of the imagination. I hope we've evolved since that.
yeah,
But there are some things for which we're hardwired. We just are, like
Yeah,
men have like I can think I'm a badass all I want, but the smallest guy could kick my ass any day. Really. I mean, it just You have the upper body strength I don't have. It's just that simple. So I think
Right.
there's a lot of behaviors like that. And I think it just goes back to those very deep recessed things that just sort of followed us
Yeah.
along this path of evolution that haven't quite left us.
That's
We,
interesting. This is
but
like
that's
your
what I
your
think
brain wants you to
it
kill an
does.
animal and show the women you killed it, but
Yeah,
you've been
because you're
trained
showing you're
to you're like the connection's not there anymore, but I'm trying
yeah.
to do something and I doesn't oh, that's weird. That's
No, what I think is though, what I think it also goes to you're showing that you can be a good provider and a good protector. And that's part of the whole male, the whole male thing. Yeah, I mean it's, and we can say that that we've evolved past all this stuff to an extent we have. And if you're pretty well self-actualized or whatever you want to call it, you know these things, you can call yourself on them, you recognize your behaviors for what they are. But there are some things that still can come up and slap you upside the head and you have no idea. And then you go, oh, wait a minute. So I think that's part of it. I think especially younger men, when you're doing those kinds of crazy ass behaviors, that's what you're showing. You're showing that you can take charge. You're a take charge guy. You can be in charge. You can be a protector. You can be the breadwinner. You can club that woolly mammoth over the head and drag it back to the cave. That's who you are. And
in the
and
most
girls,
misguided way possible.
yeah, well, absolutely. But I mean, aren't teenagers are just misguided. Their brains aren't fully formed. They have no idea. They're working it out. And so I think like newer generations are getting a little bit away from that, but still I think that there's a lot of it that's just so much a part of who we are as human beings. The best thing is, for me, the best thing is not to deny it. The best thing is recognize it, own it, and then deal with it in a way that makes sense in a, context of the time. But don't try to deny. There's some things I think that are just there. Like I have brown eyes for a reason. So, I mean, there's just some things that you inherit as a human being because most of our DNA is identical except for this teeny little bit that's not. So, we share all these things, all these common traits. That's who we are. So, for me, whenever I catch, I always try to reflect, because I always want to make sure I'm not bullshitting myself and that, I'm being as authentic me as I can.
Yeah.
And so it requires some work. Sometimes I have to just sit down and go, Joan, what the hell? You know,
Yeah.
what are you thinking? What are you doing? Catch up with it and realize what's going on. But I think that's just part of being evolved as a human being. You do that. Sadly, not everyone does that. And mostly the criminals I write about and we're talking about, they never did that.
No.
No, not one. They have no moment of self-reflection because they don't feel like they need it. They're fine. Everybody else is kind of messed up, but they're good. They got this, you know,
Yeah.
crazy behavior.
Seriously. All
I
right,
mean,
well,
I
do
think
we
it's
you
part
want
of
to
nature
what
for
was that?
sure. I said I think it's part of nature. If you notice, like, for example, peacocks or even ducks, like the male is always really brightly colored and the female's kind of like the ugly duckling or in nature. So
Yeah,
it's I think you're right, Joan. It's just innate in us. Like
yeah,
that
they're
have to
showing.
mate.
They
Yeah.
try they want to show you what they're bringing, you know,
Yeah.
and then so it makes perfect sense, especially teenagers. It makes perfect sense to me that
Right.
boys would be hanging from 8-story window ledges. That's just who they are. That's
Yeah. I,
and then
I
and
wish I
just
had that self-reflection at the time so I could have skipped that step of like
what
what are we
all
doing?
this, Ryan, all the steps are necessary. As painful, as humiliating as they are, believe me, I've been humiliated countless times by my behavior. But all the
Right?
steps, seriously, I mean, oh my
Yeah.
God, no
Oh yeah.
one, no one knows how to make a bigger fool of me than me. I mean, seriously, I do it better than anyone could ever do. And
Yeah.
so, but that's the thing, like it's the journey. I had to be there to get here and wherever I'm going to be next.
Yeah,
So,
you're
I'm
right.
okay with that. I'm okay with that. Did I do some stupid stuff? Oh my God. Yeah.
You're
That's a
telling me.
whole other chapter right there. That's
Yeah.
like I said, that's going to be my autobiography. It seemed like a good idea at the time.
Right.
That's it.
That's
That's my story. It seemed I think that's most of it. Seemed like a good idea at the time.
I think we
You
can all
know?
relate to that.
Hmm.
yeah.
I think we can.